bringing you in-depth discussion from one of the rad groups of online writers covering the Edmonton Oilers. Are you ready for Oilers Overtime? Join us as we talk news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and more. All featured on one of the most glorified teams in the NHL. From the great one to the next one. From the boys on the bus to the decade of darkness. This is Oilers Overtime.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another edition of THW Oilers Overtime with the Hockey Writers. My name is Jim Parsons. I'm here with two-thirds of the other half or other group. I guess two-thirds and the other half doesn't really make sense. No, does it? Two-thirds of the rest of our group anyway. Julian Mongillo and Brian Swin is with us. Julian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Oilers are looking good, so that's a positive. So things are looking up, and everybody should be all upbeat and ready to go today.
Yeah, we'd be a little bit happier if they had beat Ottawa in overtime there, but not quite. They got close. They got the loser Gary Bettman point out of it, but that's okay. Brian Swain's with us too. Brian, how are you?
That's how you can tell that Julian doesn't live in Edmonton if he thinks it's going good, because the sky has been falling the last 24 hours around here, as it tends to happen in Edmonton. The sky is absolutely falling.
Don't worry, it's over here too, and the Leafs lose. Don't worry.
Well,
I like that Canada jersey you're repping.
Oh, ready to go. Could be clinching tomorrow night if everything comes our way. But yeah, doing well anyway. Doing well. There's an awful lot to talk about.
Yes. Yeah. We almost wanted to do kind of a midweek show because of the Evander Kane news. We couldn't quite organize it, couldn't quite get our schedules aligned. So we're going to do a lot of that tonight. But before we do, we're just going to do a quick little plug here. Let you know that this week's show is brought to you by the Hockey Writers coverage for the race for hockey gold at the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. It's going to be 3 solid weeks of wall-to-wall coverage here at the Hockey Writers, both the women's and men's Olympic tournaments. So make sure you check it out. Roster and player analysis, game previews and recaps, commentary, a whole bunch more, all the Hockey Writers. So make sure you tune in for all of the Olympic coverage in that respect. But yes, let's get right to it. Let's talk about Evander Kane. First thing I want to do, and it's too bad we didn't have Colton here because I have a feeling that he would have had quite the opinion on this one, but maybe we'll get it when he comes back on next week. Julian, I'll start with you. First reactions, we had heard about it. Evander Kane was probably going to sign with the Edmonton Oilers. It was like down to maybe a few teams, Florida, Tampa, and then maybe the Washington Capitals, but it was kind of always the Edmonton Oilers. That was the team that was in on him right away. That was the team most people assumed that he was going to go to. It was just a matter of the NHL finishing off their investigation into his travel itinerary in December. And it turns out there was not enough evidence to really do anything about it. He's not being suspended. He's free to sign. So he signs with the Oilers. First reaction to the signing. What do you think of Evander Kane in an Oilers uniform?
Well, I think initially I was kind of on the fence with it because of where the state the team was at the time we were discussing it, because they were amidst the losing streak. So it's a little bit tough to evaluate. It's also tough to evaluate after you've seen him play and he's already scored his first goal. But I think overall the move is been good and worth it right now. It's very low risk, which is what I like about it. And it changes the dynamic of the forward group a lot, which is what I liked. And I've spoke about earlier shows about having to add a top 6 forward to either push people down or a top 6 forward to be able to play on your third line, which they kind of already done that with adding Kane. So I like that aspect of the deal. It's very low risk, like I said. And I think I watched that interview with him in on the TSN with the shift interview that he had. Yeah. So just reading that, or watching it, it was just more of I don't know if I fully commit to him being changed or different. I think it's still a work in progress, but some of the signs were positive from that. And I think that the culture shock is not going to be as much as people thought initially it would be.
Brian, the argument against Evander Kane, of course, is his off-ice stuff. As Julian mentioned in that interview, he sort of took the angle of, look, what you think you know about me, you don't really know. What you've heard is not always necessarily the case. He did say that he made a couple of mistakes. He wouldn't go into the details of why he was suspended, which for most reports are that he faked a vaccination card, which got him his 21 games. It's clear that Evander Kane makes some boneheaded decisions. He has over the duration of his entire career. And it's followed him around a little bit with the teams that he's gone to and then left, and not always under the best circumstances. So the biggest thing here now for Oilers fans that are against this move is that he's going to be a problem, inevitably, that this is going to end badly, that this isn't worth it. What do you think? Can you separate the two things? Is Evander Kane a big enough problem, or has he been a big enough problem? Is he misunderstood? Is the reputation warranted? How much does it play a factor here?
So a lot to unpack there. My opinion's kind of been evolving as this situation goes on. I've never looked at this as simply an on ice, it separated the off ice from the on ice, in the respect that even if he comes into the team and he's not disruptive, and he does, he scores 20 goals, whatever, he doesn't cause a disruption, he finds chemistry with the guys, they have a lot of success. For me, it's still an issue if you want somebody that potentially is the things that he's been accused of, if you want somebody like that representing your organization. And I think if you just watched social media last week, there was a lot of Oilers fans that were expressing that, a lot of female fans that were expressing that discomfort with some of the allegations from his past. And I think it's greater, the Oilers in this community, and I don't say this for any team in any community, but the Oilers in Edmonton, they mean a lot. They represent this city. They really are this city's identity to the world. They're what we're known for. And I think it means an awful lot to people to put it this way, you'd rather lose with good people than maybe win with those who might not be. Now, having said that, we have to take Evander Kane at his words. He used the term all the time, where there's smoke, there's fire. And it's kind of hard when you see one instance after another piling up. And they're different transgressions too. Then you start to get a bit suspicious. But the one thing I wanted to hear was from Holland and Tippett, specifically Ken Holland, GM, as to why they felt comfortable making this signing, why they felt comfortable bringing this guy into their locker room, why they felt this was a guy they were comfortable having represent the organization and the team. They said that they met with him. They had long chats with him at dinner and everything, and they seemed to feel comfortable with it. So you know what? Everyone deserves a second chance. This isn't his second chance. This is like his fourth or fifth. But let's see. Do not, I don't want to judge, right? Let's see what he has. He's got another opportunity here. And maybe he's completely telling the truth. Maybe everything that he has been accused of, like he's stated in the shift interview, isn't what it seems to be.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, maybe we can separate the two things. Like, he on ice, there's no argument. He's a fantastic hockey player. Like, that's just the reality of the situation. And what people I think have a beef with, there's two ends of this. One, if he did what he's accused of doing, that's not good, right? Even if he didn't, the question of, what kind of a moral compass does this Oilers team have, and bringing in a player who could be, not the best human being. And so the question here is, okay, well, how much does that matter? To the Oilers, it doesn't seem to matter as much. Like you said, they did their homework, but they need to win. And when you're on a 7-game losing streak, or you're 12, or for whatever you were, and it's just brutal, and there's no assets going out, a small contract coming in, and you can win. And Connor McDavid, Duncan Keith, Mike Smith, Zach Hyman, all these guys have come out and said, look, if he's part of this team, he'll be welcomed here, and we want to win hockey games. The window to win is short in Edmonton. So the balancing of the scales here is really kind of the question. And for me, I don't know what Evander Kane didn't do, but and you said it when they were smoked as fire. He said when there's smoke, typically it clears. That may be true. Like, he might have done some stupid things, like fake a vaccination card, cross the border, stuff like that. But if he didn't do the really, really, really bad stuff that they're saying, well, whatever, right? Like, just because you don't get along with all your teammates all the time, and just because some players don't like you, there are other people on the team that do. So is he as bad as they're made it out? I don't know. I honestly don't know.
There's a couple things in that interview too. Like, he was saying that like some stuff was in the locker room said in confidence that ended up getting leaked. And there was so that could have been someone who had a vendetta against him. Like, I'm not trying to say he's right or wrong, but there's some instances where he seemed like he was making a lot of sense and he was making headway. And there was some instances in that interview where he was it seemed like it was disingenuous, or it was just kind of saying the right things, which it's a mixed bag. And there's a lot of layers to unpack in this whole situation from a bunch of different angles, which makes this so unique. But I think overall, if the GM and the coach and the management staff have done their due diligence and deemed that this was a safe signing from whatever legal standpoint or future suspension standpoint, they wouldn't risk the money that they put on the line, especially with the cap situation as it is, if they didn't believe that they were making the right decision. So because they're very cap strapped as it is, and I know that they could probably get rid of that contract no problem if they had to, but to me, being as limited, because if now guys are coming off LTIR, they need to move money around in order to make it happen, right? So there's a bunch of different things to unpack here.
Yeah, I mean, a third of the teams working in a third of the teams in the league are working in LTIR. It's just one of those seasons, right? And it's pretty low risk in terms of that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to find out, right? Like if Evander Kane comes in here and he's squeaky clean for 4 months and everything, people will have the hindsight of 2020, look back at this and go, oh, see, Evander Kane was fine. What a smart gamble that was. Everything worked out. The Oilers did really well, blah, 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 blah. And if he screws up and he messes up in the next 2 months, everybody's going to look back and go, I told you. We shouldn't have thought it.
Do you guys see this as like a longer term? Like, could this potentially be him re-signing, or is this simply just let's see what he can do for us in these whatever 40 games we have left or whatever it is, and if we can make a playoff push and hopefully he could get what Barry got when he came here and get a contract after us if he does it, if all goes well. Is it kind of like a win-win for both, or is this like a more of a longer term effect?
I'll ask you the same question, Brian. I'll take this stab at this first. One, I think if he has a fantastic, 40 games and he scores like 18 or 20 goals in those 40 games, which is a really high production rate, I don't think he's an Oiler next year because I think another team's going to give him more money. But I do believe if he has a good season and everything's squeaky clean, that the Oilers will definitely consider it. What do you think, Brian? Is this a tryout for him, or is just this, one and done, this season's over and then we move on?
Well, that's my exact take too, that I don't think they necessarily look at this as, a 4-month relationship here. I think if he does come in and play well and gets along and everything works out, I do think they would, like you said, they'd be interested in bringing him back. But by the same token, that if that happens, he probably has priced himself out of their range, right?
Well, he'll want the money, right? Like if he comes in and he does his job and he has a good reputation and he's a good teammate and he scores a lot, and there are 4 or 5, 6 teams willing to give him money for the summer, he's going to go where one, he probably doesn't have a bad reputation or a history, and then 2, where he's going to get paid. And the Oilers just can't afford to pay him, big money if he signs. Maybe he does another 1-year deal with the Oilers and see what he can do all season, and boost his numbers over 82 games. But I don't know. We'll see. Julian, I'll hop to you and go, okay, well, we've talked about Evander Kane, the signing. We talked about Evander Kane a little bit, the person. What did you think of his first 2 games, really? How did he look? Obviously a little slow because he hasn't played an NHL game all year. Played 8 Barracuda games. What did you think of his abilities on the ice, his meshing with Connor McDavid? How did he look to you?
I mean, he looked good considering he hasn't played much. I think it was 5 AHL games that he's had all year, but that's all going to come back. I mean, a guy of his caliber, I'm not worried about, losing his scoring touch or anything like that. I think he has it still. And the chemistry is something that's going to come with time and a little bit of time at least, and kind of getting to know the guys. So I'm not too concerned about that. I thought he looked good overall. I thought he brings an element that the Oilers don't really have, in a physical presence higher in the lineup. You don't see, there's not many guys that throw the body around. And I think he's that big style frame that, he can be a power forward that has elite scoring ability, which is something the Oilers and McDavid haven't really had, that can perform at an elite level. Like they've had Patty Maroon, they've had Lucic, guys like that play with him, but they're nowhere near the goal scoring or type of player that Kane is. So in terms of that, I thought it was good. And I think he checks a lot of the boxes that they have. I wrote an article about all the things that he kind of does for them. So you guys can check that out too, and go in more detail there. But I just think that, this signing does a lot for the Oilers in terms of a team standpoint, and especially for McDavid as well.
Yeah, I thought he looked a little sluggish in the first game. Like you could tell he was a little tired. He's a little winded, which is to be expected. He got a couple more minutes in the game, the second game. So he played 17:52 in the first game and 18:58 in the next game.
Yeah.
And I'm sure his minutes will go up if he's playing regularly with Connor McDavid. Now, Connor McDavid gets more ice time simply because in certain situations at the end of a penalty kill, he goes out there with Leon. So he gets a couple minutes here or there, extra stuff. But I thought he looked okay. In the game against Ottawa, I thought there were moments where he looked like he's got some energy. Like he's in there. He's being physical. He's forechecking. He made a couple of good plays where I thought he had some close calls. The first goal he scored in the first game against Montreal was smart. He went right to the net. I just going to hit him. But, still, you get a first goal on the first shot.
Well, that's kind of what he's going to bring you to, right? Like that driving the net and, getting those goals, right? Which they
and it's huge, right? Because the Oilers had surrendered the first goal against everybody for however many.
He'll take it however they come,
right? The fact that he's the guy that comes in and he gets the Oilers the first goal in the game is unreal. Brian, what do you think? How did he look to you?
Thought he looked like a very talented player that hasn't played much in the last 6 months. There were definitely signs of ring rust, and you could also see the ability. And I thought he certainly put in an honest game's work. You saw the signs of the elements that he can bring to this team, and as Julian's pointed out, the chemistry and all that takes time. So it was pretty funny though. I'd actually predicted that he was going to score. He was going to be the guy that was going to come in here and end the streak of the other teams going first. And sure enough, he did. And even, it was a fluky goal, but you got to be in that position to score a fluky goal. Yeah. The Oilers haven't been having guys that have been getting themselves in that position in front of the net. So right there, that to me was the perfect, that summed it all up, what they hope he's going to bring and what he appears that he can bring to this team.
Yeah. What do they say? It's better to be lucky than good, but sometimes to be lucky, you got to be smart. So that was what he did. Right. What I really liked about the way that he played the game was just where he seemed to, naturally know where to go. He didn't have exactly the chemistry with McDavid that you'll hope that he'll learn and build over the next few games. The biggest takeaway for me was what the rest of the team looked like. When you shuffle the lines around and you get Kane on that top line, and then you can move Hyman down to the third line. You got Nugent Hopkins in there with him. You've got that second line the depth and the ability to balance out the roster is unbelievable to me. Like it's night and day different that one guy can make that big of a change to your entire roster, right? Like,
well, yeah. I mean, how many goals have the bottom six accounted for here in these last two games?
Well, that's the thing. That first game against Montreal, 7-2. Who's the only guy that doesn't get a point? McDavid, right? Like
that's exactly what they need. It's exactly what.
Well, and this is, Derek Ryan has suddenly woken up here these last couple of games, right? He's kind of bringing what we had hoped or thought he would. So, this is completely, reimagined.
This is all to me because people are being slotted at a more role suited for them because
they're where they should
Ryan was playing third line center, which he's not. He's a fourth line center who's going to go win all your faceoffs and do everything right in the defensive zone, which then you're putting less pressure on him to score goals or have to chip in offensively, right? He can focus more on his defensive game and doing things right. That's the biggest takeaway for me was what Kane brought, is that you're getting that forward that you needed to push everybody down the lineup that I've been talking about for a while. And that third line with Hyman, Nuge, and Cassian, I love it. I love the makeup of it. I think that can be a legit shutdown line because of Hyman and Nuge's defensive abilities, and Cassian will be there to be your spark plug and go start hitting bodies and the good energy line. And those guys are more than capable of chipping in offensively.
I was just going to say, yes, they'll be defensively reliable, but they will outscore almost every third line they play.
I would be very comfortable if I was putting those guys out against the top line. Like, you know what I mean? Like if that was my shutdown line, I'd be fine with that.
Yeah. If you're playing them in that role, if you're playing them like Tippett did against Montreal, where they're just putting them against less suitable competition.
Then they're even better because they can
look
take
what
advantage.
Hyman does, right?
Exactly.
It's 2 goals and an assist. Like everybody looks good. Like that's just the reality of it. And then you got McLeod kicking around there and his speed's all over the place. It's ideal. It's what the Oilers want. So at this point, what are your line combinations, Brian? Are you keeping things the way that they seem to be so far? Do you keep Kane and McDavid and who was it, Yamamoto, and you keep Puljujarvi, Fogle, and Leon Draisaitl. Like, is that the way you keep it? Do you like that combination?
I'm not that big on the second line right now, but I don't think I'd break it up, because to do that would be break up the other lines, and I like how everything else looks right now. So I would leave it as is. I'm all open at this point for, like, and Tippett is throwing lines in the blender in the past. I think there's with the addition of Kane, you can come up with so many different combinations up and down the lineup now. And, I'm play with it a little bit. Let's see what we got here. Let's have some fun, right? Mix it up. But I like it right now. Like Puljujarvi, he's struggling right now. Fogle,
He's not as visible as he was.
No.
Like, he's playing good hockey. He seems to be smart, and he's getting some, but the scoring chances aren't coming like they were at the beginning of the year, and he's not able to. And that, I guess, is what you get when you're not playing with McDavid. Puljujarvi knows where to go when he's playing with him, right? He understands it.
He's just not going to do it on his own. Like, he's not going to create those opportunities himself.
Yeah, like there was a play in Montreal where he was hustling back to the front of the net, but they scored before he could get the rebound, right? Like, so he knows where he should be, and had the puck slid another inch to the left, he'd have scored. But yes, I get what you're saying, Brian. He's just not on the score sheet like he was.
Yeah, and I think the same Fogle hasn't been quite up to where he was for at least stints anyway, back a couple months ago right now either. I don't know. I mean, I like every other line though. But what do you guys think about the Fogle, Draisaitl, Puljujarvi? Because I'm not big on it, but like I say, to break that, to do something to that means to do something to the other lines. And when 3 out of 4, you're probably pretty good with that.
Yeah, I guess you could swap Yamamoto, Fogle around a little bit. You could play with that sort of combination, but I think you got to find your duos that absolutely click. And I think they're hoping McDavid and Kane will be that duo that clicks. And then you're hoping that Draisaitl and maybe Puljujarvi are the ones that click. And then you just find that guy that can be the third, right? Because that's what they say. Find your pair and then stick a third guy in there that just knows what to do with those two. Yeah. I think that's what the Oilers are trying to do here. I guess the only real concern for me, and we saw this against Ottawa, is the line combinations might give Dave Tippett too much flexibility to try stuff. Like in overtime, he didn't run with David and Draisaitl. I was shocked by that. Like, maybe it was because they were tired and they played the line, but typically 3-on-3, that's your go-to, right? Draisaitl, McDavid. And that overtime against Ottawa wasn't pretty. Like, the Oilers got outplayed badly in that overtime, and Ottawa ended up winning it. So I wonder if sometimes when you have too much at your disposal, like you can switch the comment, you get a little blender happy, maybe. I don't know,
will.
But
I know
he will. That's for sure. I mean, we've seen it before already, and now that he's got all these tools at his disposal, he's probably jawing to just try and some new things out. But I mean, I'm not opposed to the lines, because I think that what they did was the right idea in terms of fitting like a power forward with, your playmaker, and then a guy who's going to go get the puck for you. So I think they kind of did that, or attempted to do that as best as they could with the group that they have. So, and then the only other thing I think you could kind of go to would be maybe throwing McLeod in on that second line with Draisaitl to see what he could do, because with McDavid, he looked more of like a skilled player rather than having to carry his own line. It's a little bit tougher for him. So I think that could be almost a switch, maybe to see if you can find some sort of, I guess, offense or someone to play with Draisaitl. If you're going to run with the top line as Kane and McDavid and Yamamoto, that's kind of the only thing I would switch. But other than that, I think that the flexibility that it gives you in terms of everybody slotted into the right spots and making a better third line, I think I would almost just leave it as is and hope that they can kind of figure it out on their own.
It's going to be an interesting segue to the next segment here. But before we move over, I want to make one comment about that. There's one person that I like watching more fly through the neutral zone than Ryan McLeod, and that's Connor McDavid. Ryan McLeod is so fast and so good at skating through the neutral zone. I would hate to take him off the center, right? That would be my only concern there. Sticking him on the wing, he'd be able to go wide around people, and he's done it a couple times this season. But man, watching him go through the neutral zone, he's dangerous. And when he doesn't have good defensemen to play against, he's almost unstoppable. If he had the finish McDavid had, he'd be really, really good. Like, that's how much I like Ryan McLeod. But it does bring up an interesting question when you're talking about finding the right fit for a guy like Draisaitl. Dylan Holloway, he's having a pretty good little run of games here in Bakersfield, and there's a lot of talk, a lot of whispers about the fact that the Oilers are probably going to give him a look here before the season's over. My question, I'll start with you, Brian. Is that a dangerous idea? Do you like the idea of Dylan Holloway coming up here and getting a showcase, or are we getting into rushing the prospects territory if we do that?
I'm really intrigued by it. I would love to see it if we can do it with no risks attached. I'd be interested to get your guys' thoughts on this. Are you doing that in the best interest of the team and or the best interest of the player? Are they mutually exclusive at this point in time? You know what I mean? Like Holland speaks about liking to have guys overripe. And this would kind of fly in the face of that if he's bringing up. I mean, Dylan Holloway's played 5 professional games right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And we're talking about
5 points though.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I'm not detracting from. He's looked incredible, but I'm just saying he's played all of 5 professional games. Mm-hmm. That it would be really fast tracking things by Holland standards. If you're bringing it up here, you're doing it just for the sake of the team and potentially at the expense of the development of the player, or can they both complement one another? Both interests complement one another.
I'm going to say there's no way to make a single decision without considering 2 or 3 different factors when it comes to Dylan Holloway. One, you look at what's working and what isn't. And if the line combinations, there's a missing ingredient there, like we talked about, whether it's Warren Fogle or it's Kyler Yamamoto or one of those 2 guys just isn't performing as well, then that might be when you give Holloway a shot. 2, depending on what you're doing before the trade deadline, if you need the cap space and you can clear out a contract that makes more money and you can bring up Dylan Holloway for $925K and you get a little more flexibility to do something else, then you might go, okay, well, this kid's pretty skilled. We can use him in a couple of different places. He can play center or wing, and it allows us to go get that left shot D, or allows us to look at, then maybe that weighs into the decision, right? But I do think they're hesitant to rush him. I think even if they consider this, it's not at least for like another month. Like I can't even imagine they look at this right away. But I think they'll consider it. And I think they'll consider it in, conjunction with a bunch of other stuff, like what they're doing with the deadline, what they're doing with this player. Can they move? And I don't want to say you move a guy like Zach Kassian, but you might, right? Like if you can clear up that cap space, and you're probably going to move him in the offseason anyway. I know they'd like to have him for the playoffs, but when you got Kane, maybe you don't need the Kassian as much, right? Like that's just a bunch of stuff going on, right? Yeah. And that's how I see the Dylan Holloway situation. But I think he gets a look. At least he gets a cup of coffee in a month here. Julian, what about you?
I agree with you guys in terms of what he can bring. And in terms of moving him to be a cheaper option to replace somebody else in the lineup, if you can move a contract, I don't think that will be the case. I don't think they'll be able to move a contract big enough to free up enough cap space for them to want to make this move or bring him in right away. Personally, I think it's probably best to leave him in the minors for the rest of the season. I don't want to bring him in, and then you're risking losing players to waivers. The depth is going to be important going down into the playoffs. I think having the ability to kind of interchange people is important. And we've seen teams at deadline starting to get much deeper and almost going like with the goalie situation, going 4 deep on goaltenders and stocking that cabinet for a playoff run. So I think it's more important to have the depth now and just let him do his thing in the minors, because he hasn't had any professional experience. I don't want to throw him into the fire. The expectations are going to be high for him for sure. So I think it would be best to try to get him in over the off season, get him in some sort of regimen of, working with the players that you're going to be playing with over the off season, and then basically integrate him in the group through that, through the off season and into training camp. I think that's going to be the best way for him to kind of learn and get along with everything. But again, it's a fluid situation, like you guys were saying. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, but I think it's in the best interest of the team and the player to kind of leave him down and let him do his thing in the AHL right now.
Can I ask you guys, what do you think if he does get thrown into the fire? How does he perform?
I think he's like, I mean, it's hard to say. It reminds me of what we saw with maybe Ryan McLeod last year. Right. Yeah, like he's doing real well in Bakersfield. He comes up, there's some expectations there, but he doesn't play bad enough that you're like, yeah, there's no future for this kid. Like everybody knew Ryan McLeod was going to be something, right? But he just didn't have the numbers.
Benefited from that last year, right? From that run of 10, 12 games in the playoffs. Yeah. And I
absolutely. He just didn't produce anything. Ryan McLeod didn't do anything other than he looked okay. Like he looked like he wasn't out of place. He didn't produce anything. And I think they thought he might, and he didn't. So that could happen with a guy like Holloway, right? He could come up, he could look not like at all like a fish out of water. He just might not produce anything. And if that's the case, then people will be like, oh my gosh, Dylan Holloway, why is he here? Blah, blah, blah. But he might look just fine. It just might not equate to points on the board.
And it might very well go to the point where these guys, like I said, maybe there's no combination or they're missing an ingredient that they find. And if they do bring him up, I just want them to make sure they're putting him in a position to succeed, not somewhere in the bottom 6 to kind of be a body. If they're going to play him and they're going to want to use him, they got to put him in an area that's going to suit his game and where he's going to be able to try and succeed to be something that they need right now. Not just integrating him in to see what he's going to give you.
Kind of like Cole Caulfield in Montreal.
Yeah.
Right. Like he came up, he was unbelievable for a while, was put in that role, that top 6, and he was relied on to do the scoring, and he did a whole crap load of it. And then next season, he doesn't do much of anything. Right. So,
well, I mean, I think if he does get called up, well, this is not what's going necessarily, I think is going to happen. It's what should happen. I think if you do it, you're playing him with Draisaitl.
Yeah.
No, I'm not sure if that's what they would do, but that's the way I see it. And your example there with Caulfield is perfect. It's bang on. That's exactly what you'd hope to capture from him in this situation.
Yeah. If you can get lightning in a bottle like that, man, you're laughing, right? Like that's pretty high lofty expectations for a guy to come in and play 15 games and look like that. But, it would be pretty good. All right. Last segment of the night. We'll start with Julian on this one, because I think you're the dude that invented this segment. So we'll let you go first. +1, -1. Whether you combine them, whether you pick one or the other, which way you going this week?
Team's rolling good right now. I'm going to stay positive because things are looking good. I'm going to give it to Zach Hyman because he kind of had a stretch of kind of just being there, being present. And we needed more from him. And that game where he had against Montreal was kind of something that it was good to see, and how that line kind of worked together in order to provide that depth scoring, which I think was very big to see from an Oilers standpoint and from the team contribution. So I'm going to give my +1 to Zach Hyman.
Brian, what about you? What are you thinking here?
I'll let you go because I got a couple, so I don't want to necessarily steal yours. So you can go first. I'll finish it up.
For me, I'm actually going to go way off the board here and probably pick something that I don't think a lot of people are going to think that I would pick. I've been really impressed with Duncan Keith. Like lately, I thought he's looked really solid. Like he's playing 21, 22 minutes a night. He's like, I didn't watch him a ton in Chicago because didn't get a chance to. And I'm not even saying he's anywhere close to as good as he was in those prime years. But he looks to me like a guy that knows what decision to make in every situation, and he's smart about it. And that's super important for this Oilers team right now, because they need a guy that can make good first passes, get it out of the zone, smart reads, hit guys in stride. Duncan Keith can do all of that. And when he's looking good, he looks good, right? Like I know there was a lot of talk about, can he keep it up? Is this too many minutes? He's not the guy that he was. He's old. But he looks solid, man. Like to me, I've liked his play of late, and it's good to have it because I think he's been impressive considering the reputation he was bringing with him. But in the last few games, I think he's been very, very important for that blue line.
And we haven't gotten too high on him. We haven't dogged on him, so that must mean he's going about his business, doing his job, and that's what you want from a defenseman that's going to be steady for you. So. I mean, that just goes to show you that he's doing what he needs to do.
Yeah, and my second runner-up was the fact that the Oilers scored 7 goals and Connor McDavid can good one. That was my runner-up. Okay, Brian, what about you?
Yeah, I didn't see that one coming. That was not on my list, so we're safe. I'm going to go with Evan Bouchard, another defenseman. Evan Bouchard. This is the midpoint of the season. He's the only defenseman to have played in all 41 games. He's got 9 goals. He had which game did he score 2 in last week?
Nashville.
The 2 power play. The first game, Tyson Barrie went down. Yeah, it might have been Nashville.
Yeah. He's got 9 goals, 24 points. I mean, he's leading the defenseman in scoring. He plays the most minutes on the penalty kill on this entire team, which we had never expected. I mean, we would if you said at the start of the season he's going to have 24 points halfway through the year, you would have thought, wow, okay, that's pretty.
Well, good. I said he'd have 50. I said if he played the power. Remember, I said
that
if he played the power play and he took over for Tyson Barrie, it was very possible he could get 50 points, and he's on pace for it.
He's on pace for it. And we would have taken that. We would have been like, wow. But the fact that he's doing what he has been far more along He's far more progressed defensively.
We thought he was an offensive guy
further along to begin with than we thought he was. It's probably more the point. But I just think he's been, there's been a lot of ups and downs with this teams, and not a lot of guys have been consistently a good story throughout. I think at the midpoint of the season, he's just I just wanted to give him a big +1 because like I said, just far exceeded expectations, and he's been everything that he'd hoped for. And you can't say that about too many people on this team.
Well, I'm a big Bouchard fan. I think you guys both know that I'm a huge Bouchard fan. The one thing I will say, not to be too critical of him, because I'm going to follow this up with something positive after I say something negative here, but he does have a tendency for bad giveaways. He'll turn around and he'll try to make a play and he'll cough one right up the middle. That said, he recovers very well. So when he does it and he gives it away, he's the first guy to fix the problem. So,
and that'll happen with young defensemen.
Yes, and that's just a confidence thing. That's his ability, like Draisaitl on the backhand, just as thinking that he can make the play, right? He just is confident that he can pull it off. Sometimes he doesn't look, and that's just inexperience. But for the most part, he's making plays, and he's trying anyway to make plays that veterans are able to make, and young rookies kind of, even though he's not technically a rookie anymore, shouldn't be able to make. And so he's playing those. It's going to happen. He's going to make mistakes when you play that many minutes too, right?
Yeah, and the mistakes will come. He's 22 years old and he's played 60-some NHL games.
I bring it up because I don't want, and I think they see Bouchard differently than they've seen Ethan Bear and other guys in the past, but I don't ever want them to look at Bouchard and go, oh my God, this kid's a cough-up machine and struggle and not play him still because of it. But they did it with Samorukov in that first game. They've done it with Ethan Bear. They've had a tendency when guys do that, but I think Bouchard's in a different category. I think they see him differently. I think they understand what he is, what he can be, how important he is to the group. But I think by this time next year, he's part of that 5-6 man leadership group. That's how important I think they see him.
Yep.
I think I agree. Should be right now, actually, now you mentioned it, but that's the leadership group on this team is a whole other topic for another time.
We'll do it next week.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, guys. I appreciate it. We'll have Colton on next week to hopefully talk about it as well. For everybody else here at the Hockey Writers, thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate it. Check out the YouTube page, check out the hockeywriters.com. Sign up for the morningskate.io newsletter and everything else that we can pump your way in terms of content and great articles and columns, and of course the Olympic coverage coming up here too. So for Julian, Brian, and myself, thank you guys. It's been another edition of THW Oilers Overtime, and we'll talk to you next week.